This is the 1983 Doctor Who Summer Special. And what makes this particularly unusual, I don't know if you can see how nice that is. That is in really, really high grade. As I said, we don't normally see them like this. They're, these are not particularly valuable. Marvel UK comics tend to be sort of thrown away, or, you don't see many copies. Anyway, this is the 1983 Doctor Who Summer Special. 1983, of course, was the 20th anniversary of Doctor Who. What's worrying about that for me is that there were 20 years, obviously, between 1963 and 1983, but there's, 42 years between 1983 and now? Wow, okay, that's gone fast. Anyway, in this magazine, there's not a huge amount of original material. The cover is an original image by Steve Dillon and Steve O'Leary, and we get a sort of linking narrative inside here that links two different reprinted comic book stories that both come from either Doctor Who Weekly or Doctor Who Monthly from years previous to this. But there's some stuff in here that, having sat and reread it last night, there's some stuff in here that really does make me think this must have been quite influential on some Doctor Who writers, maybe later on. And I'll tell you why as we go through. So this sort of linking narrative that is in here, it's a prose linking narrative called The Catalogue of Events. And it's written by Alan Mackenzie with some artwork by Steve Dillon and Steve O'Leary. And it sees the fifth incarnation of the Doctor land in a library which is still uses paper, and it's called it's kind of catalogues rather than stories, it catalogues events, and it kind of implies in this story that the these people that are running this catalogue of events, that they kind of dictate events throughout history and time, which, as I said, sort of implies that there is no free will, which obviously the Doctor does not like. However, it does feature a couple of little moments. There's a parallel there to Silence in the Library, the Stephen Moffat Silence in the Library. But what I did like about this is that we get to see a single image of Steve Dillon's version of Rassilon. Rassilon, obviously, being one of the great Time Lords, and it also includes references to Logopolis, Tom Baker's last story. At one point, the Doctor notices some mathematics and says, "Oh, have you ever been to Logopolis?" And then there's also quite an interesting moment where the librarian sort of scolds the Doctor for not choosing the right event. And that event that he chose not to choose is the destruction of the Daleks, which obviously references Genesis of the Daleks, if you know the story. So the two comic strips that we get reprinted in here are Junkyard Demon, which was originally published in Doctor Who Magazine or Doctor Who Monthly 58 and 59 in 1981. And it sees the fourth Doctor arrive on a junk collecting spaceship. And what's interesting for me is that it's written by Steve Parkhouse, but the artwork is done by someone called Olofo Boyla, who I don't know, but mainly by Mike McMahon. And Mike McMahon, if you know him, as certainly as I do, worked prolifically on 2000 AD and did a lot of Judge Dredd. Has a really wild art style. I love his stuff. It's like really crazy. So to see him do Doctor Who, Tom Baker era Doctor Who, really, really interesting. Anyway, the story sees the Doctor land on this junk collecting spaceship and then find out that one of the things they do when they sort of reappropriating this old tech is that they convert Cybermen into like helpful house servants. But you see them finding out they've got an old Cyberman, and there's a whole story there. But anyway, what's interesting for me is that the version of the Cyberman that is depicted is kind of a halfway house between the cloth-faced 10th Planet Cybermen, and the Cybermen from the Moonbase, and what's the other story? Tomb of the Cybermen, because they've got the kind of hoover pipe and the tennis balls, but they've got the cloth face. Yeah, it really, really, really reminded me of what's it called? Not The Last Cyberman. Nightmare in Silver. Neil Gaiman's Nightmare in Silver. Because it's got a lot of similar, there's a lot of parallels between this story and that one. So I do wonder whether there is a connection. And the second story in here is a reprint of probably the most reprinted non-Doctor Who comic strip, which is Abslom Dark, Dalek Killer. And if you don't know the story, I should imagine there's not many Doctor Who fans out there that haven't read Abslom Dark. But if you haven't, it originally appeared in Doctor Who Weekly, issues 17 to 20, published in 1980, but has been reprinted many, many times. It was written by Steve Parkhouse with art by Steve Dillon. And Steve Dillon at the time must have been about 17, 18 years old when he was doing this. And it is of the highest quality. If you've never seen Abslom Dark, it's so cool, but it's ultimately not Doctor Who-y. He's incredibly violent and angry. In the first three frames of this comic strip, he's basically being set up. Well, he's being committed by a jury and a judge for being basically a murderer and a criminal. And he's given a choice between either death or a fate worse than death, which is to go and pursue Daleks and kill as many Daleks as you can before you die. Which is just brilliant. The character has returned multiple times, and he has appeared, as you'll well know, in the TV show, in a blink and you'll miss it moment, in Time Heist, Peter Capaldi's story Time Heist, where his image flashes up as one of the most dangerous criminals in the universe. And he certainly is that, if you read this story.